Hi, I'm Matt O'Connor from the O'Connor Law Firm PC, answering the question, what is the difference between qualified and absolute immunity? First of all, let me explain where that phrase generally comes up. It would most often come up in a lawsuit against a government official. And most lawsuits against government officials are based on 42 United States Code Section 1983, which sounds very daunting. All it really means is it's the 42nd volume. Section 1983 is the section that it's in, so that's where you can find it. A couple of examples of lawsuits that might be under this particular code would be a lawsuit against the police for police brutality, against a jailer for violating your constitutional rights by cruel and unusual punishment, things of that nature. So that's the setting when they generally come up. So what is absolute immunity? Well, as you can imagine, those who write the laws generally gives themselves absolute immunity. The basis for this is theoretically in the common law, or that is the history of our legal system. And the United States Supreme Court has interpreted it years ago that certain governmental officials enjoy this absolute immunity. And what that means is they can't be sued as long as they are performing that governmental function. An example would be judges. You can't sue judges. They are absolutely immune if they are performing the job as a judge. That is, you can sue a judge if he's driving his car and you get into a car accident. That's not part of his job as a judge. So the judge doesn't have immunity from everything, obviously, but just from their job as a judge. So when they make rulings, if you disagree with them, you can't sue them under Section 1983 as long as it's within a reasonable scope of their employment or job as a judge. Another example, not a big surprise, those who write the laws give themselves immunity. Legislators, you can't sue a legislator under 1983. They are given absolute immunity. Some other examples would be the United States president. As long as the president is within his conduct as president, he is immune from suit. Another area that enjoys absolute immunity would be prosecutors. So if a prosecutor is doing his or her job in prosecuting someone for violation of a crime, they can't be sued. Now, there have been some distinctions that have developed over the years. And when I say things like distinctions, what I'm talking about is, the laws are written and the legislature tries to write them in a way that makes them clear and cogent and to make sense. They're not always able to foresee every circumstance. And oftentimes the courts are then left to interpret those and apply the law to certain fact patterns which may or may not fit in with the legislative language. So the example I give of the prosecutor. Prosecutors have absolute immunity, but their job as a prosecutor is in court. There's their investigative part, which is to determine whether or not a charge should be filed. And there's their job in like opening statements, calling witnesses, things like that. But is a press conference part of a traditional role as a prosecutor? And the courts have said no. So if a prosecutor makes a false statement or commits some sort of act which would infringe upon someone's constitutional rights as a prosecutor in a press conference, then the prosecutor can be liable, and that absolute immunity or complete defense from being sued goes away. Another example of someone who would be absolutely immune would be someone called as a witness. So if you're called as a witness in a bank robbery, for example, and said, yeah, that's the guy who was at the bank, I recognize his facial features and his height, etc., you could not be sued. The difference is if you are the complaining witness, that is, you're the person who filled out the affidavit that said, yes, on this date, such and such worked for me and embezzled money. If that turns out to be false, you could be liable and your absolute immunity as a witness would be gone. So those are some examples of absolute and qualified immunity and how they apply. I hope that's giving you a good explanation.